Good Shabbos. This week's parsha is the portion of Tzav, but today is also Shushan Purim. I'd like to discuss the significance of Shushan Purim. When you read the Megillah, we find that the battle to save the Jews happened on the 13th day of Adar, and they celebrated on the 14th day of Adar. And then Esther asked Achashverosh to continue the fight in the city of Shushan for one more day, and that occurs on the 14th, and then they celebrate on the 15th. The Megillah goes on to say that as a result, we celebrate Purim in unwalled cities on the 14th day of Adar and in walled cities on the 15th day of Adar. This is unusual that we have any kind of holiday or tradition that we celebrate the holiday on different days depending on what type of city you actually live in. What's even stranger is the fact that the Chazal, the sages in the Talmud, tell us that when it says we celebrate the 15th day of Adar, Shushan Purim, in walled cities, it doesn't mean any walled city. It means walled cities from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, from the time of Joshua, when he conquered the land of Israel. Now, this is really odd because this, of course, happened, the story of Purim happened many years later. So you would think that it meant that you would celebrate it in walled cities from the time of Shushan. And also, why associate it with Yeshua, Joshua, and Israel when this is in Shushan and Persia? It just seems to be very odd. So a possible explanation is just to understand just the date itself of Purim and the significance, the symbolism of that date. We know other major Jewish holidays, and I'm referring specifically to Pesach and Sukkot, are on the 15th day of the month. And those are the only holidays which really celebrate specific miracles that occurred. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are not associated with a miracle, and I'm talking about biblical holidays. And Shavuos doesn't really have a date. When you look in the Torah, Shavuos is just the 50th day after the second day of Pesach. Left for another time to explain. So the two main holidays which celebrate, the two only holidays which really celebrate a miracle, I'm not talking about Hanukkah, which is a later non-biblical holiday, are on the 15th day of the month. And the symbolism there, I think, is quite clear. And the 15th day of the month is when you have a full moon. The first day of the month is the new moon. It lasts 29 and a half days. The 15th day is the day when you have the full moon. What better time to celebrate sort of the ascendancy of the Jewish people or God or the performance of miracles when even in the nighttime there's as much light as you'll ever have. That's a beautiful time. We don't want to celebrate in the beginning of the month when the moon is non-existent and the lights are dark. Again, the symbolism is quite clear. Those times, what we think about is darkness. What we think about is suffering. When the moon is full, we're going to celebrate the fact that there's light, and therefore these miracles which occur, which God is showing his light onto the world, is a time to celebrate. That's why we have Pesach and Sukkot on the 15th, I believe. Now, when we come to establishing the holiday of Purim, of course, it's tied to the historical events as recorded in the Megillah, but again, I'm assuming that there's some deeper significance to these dates. And it's odd because it's on the 14th day. The regular day of Purim outside of Shushan is on the 14th day. But then you have Shushan Purim is on the 15th. So you see that there might be some kind of link between Shushan Purim and the other holidays of Pesach and Sukkot. And I think it's quite simple once you think of it in that way, that after the miracle, hidden miracle of Purim, which was a hidden miracle, the Jews are still under the rule of the Persian Empire. As I like to point out, at the end of the story, Esther still lives with Achashverosh. She's still living in her non-Jewish king's palace and in charge of a great estate in the Persian Empire. But she's in the Persian Empire. She's in the Persian capital, and the Jews are still under the rule and the whim of the Achashverosh. So it's not a complete redemption. It is what I'd call the beginning of the redemption. Or as they say today in Israel, we say the Eschalta de Gula, right? The beginning of the blossoming of the redemption. But therefore, it's only on the 14th day. it's still not completely light, but we're going on our way. But then Shushan Purim, she asks that even in the capital of the Persian Empire, that the Jews should be able to fight and to destroy the enemies. It doesn't say she's fighting Achashverosh. She's not opposing the king. But it's as close as you can get. In the capital itself, the Jews become powerful. And they're moving in that direction. And therefore, it's more of a celebration of complete and total redemption, although it's not complete, I admittedly have to say. But it is getting closer. And therefore, what the Chazal did, the sages did in telling us that it's associated with walled cities, they made it associated with the walled cities of that were existing in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, in the time of Joshua, because what does Joshua represent? Joshua represents the ultimate redemption. When Joshua comes in, and the first city that he conquers is Jericho, is Jericho. How is it celebrated? By bringing down how is the battle won, I should say? By bringing down the walls of Jericho with a miracle. He blows the shofar and the walls just collapse. They just sink. And the Jews become completely victorious over the enemy with God's help. And that is what we're really celebrating maybe on Shushan Purim, or at least it's a hint of it. We want to celebrate in those cities which are walled from the time of Joshua to show this is what we're really aiming for. We're aiming for another Joshua. We're aiming for another victory where we're not going to be still under the Persian Empire, but rather we're going to be completely and totally independent. And that's perhaps what Shushan Purim is all about. And of course, today it's celebrated in a very few places which we know had walls from that time. But of course, one of the places that we know for sure had a wall in that time is Yerushalayim, is Jerusalem. And how fitting is it that on the 15th day of the month is when we celebrate in the city which really represents Jewish independence and Jewish sovereignty, the establishment of a capital in Israel under David HaMelech, under David in Yerushalayim. And perhaps that's the significance of these two dates and that they were aspiring to this ultimate redemption. Good Shabbos.